The Valkyrie Dominion had conquered 17 star systems in 30 years. Their warships were the most advanced in the known galaxy. They had weapons that could melt through any armor. They had shields that could stop any attack. They had engines that could cross the void between stars in days instead of months. Every species they had encountered had either surrendered or been destroyed. There was no third option. When their scout ships reached the Sol system, they expected to find another easy target. The humans had only been traveling among the stars for 400 years. They were young. They were weak. They would fall like all the others. Admiral Zethral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment. He was tall even for a Valkyrie, with dark green scales and 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. He had personally overseen the conquest of 3 star systems. He had never lost a battle. He did not expect to lose this one. His translators were picking up human broadcasts from across their system. He watched them with growing amusement. The humans were talking about something called Heritage Fleet. They were talking about museum ships, and memorials, and living history. They kept massive warships on display in orbit, around their planets and moons. Tourists visited them. Children took school trips to see them. Veterans gathered once a year to remember the old days. They keep their old weapons as toys, Zethral said, his mandibles clicking with laughter. His subordinate, Tactician Velos, pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. Our scans show their active military fleet numbers only 47 vessels, Admiral. Their technology is adequate but not impressive. They have shields and plasma weapons, but nothing that can match our own. And these museum ships? Over 200 of them, Admiral. But they are relics. Most are between 100 and 300 years old. They use primitive fusion reactors. Their weapons are simple kinetic slug throwers. They have no shields at all, only physical armor. They are completely obsolete. Zethral laughed again. It was a harsh sound, like rocks grinding together. The humans preserve their ancient weapons and show them to their children. They are a sentimental species. Sentiment is weakness. Weakness will be their end. He gave the order to send the ultimatum. On Earth, Admiral Katie Morgan received the message in her office at Fleet Command in Geneva. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had served in the Space Force for 40 years. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had led rescue missions to the outer colonies. She had lost friends and buried heroes. Now, she watched an alien warlord demand the surrender of her entire species. The Valkyrie message was simple. Surrender all military vessels. Surrender all weapons. Accept Dominion rule. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. Katie read the message 3 times. Then she sent her response. No. The Valkyrie attacked 12 hours later. 300 warships dropped out of quantum-fold space near Jupiter. They moved through the outer system like a wave of death, destroying orbital stations and mining platforms as they came. The human defense fleet scrambled to meet them. Commander Ben Torres led the defense from the Bridge of the Horizon, the newest ship in the human fleet. He was 38 years old and had trained his entire life for a moment like this. He had never expected that moment to come. All ships, form up on my position, he ordered. We need to buy time for the civilian evacuations. 47 human ships faced 300 Valkyrie warships. The math was simple and brutal. They were outnumbered more than 6 to 1. The battle lasted 18 hours. Commander Torres fought with everything he had. His crews fought with courage and skill. They destroyed 23 enemy ships in the first wave alone. For a moment, it seemed like they might have a chance. Then the Valkyrie brought up their heavy cruisers. The plasma lances cut through human shields like they were made of paper. Ships that Torres had served on for years, ships crewed by people he had known since the academy, exploded in flashes of light and debris. The horizon took a direct hit that killed half the bridge crew. Torres kept fighting, blood running down his face, giving orders until his ship could no longer answer. When it was over, 29 human ships had been destroyed. 15 more were too damaged to fight. The remaining three limped toward Earth with the Valkyrie fleet close behind. Admiral Zethral broadcast his victory across all channels. His message reached every screen on every human world. "Your fleet is broken," he announced. "Your resistance has failed. You have 1 hour to surrender your remaining vessels. If you do not, we will destroy your homeworld. There will be no second chance." In her office, Admiral Morgan watched the broadcast in silence. Around her, staff officers were crying or praying, or simply staring at nothing. The most powerful military force in human history had been shattered in less than a day, but Katie Morgan was not crying. She was thinking. She thought about her father. He had served on the Valor, a battleship that had fought in the Jupiter War 200 years ago. The Valor was still in orbit around Mars. Preserved as a museum ship, Katie had visited it as a child. She remembered running her small hands along the thick armor plating, listening to her father tell stories about battles fought before she was born. Those old ships had been built different. They were not elegant or efficient. They were big and ugly and brutally tough. They had no shields because their builders did not trust shields. They had armor 3 meters thick because their builders believed in things they could touch. They had kinetic weapons that fired solid metal at incredible speeds because their builders knew that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. Katie picked up her communicator. Her hands were steady. "Get me Director Sam Holloway at the Heritage Fleet Museum," she said. "Tell him it's Admiral Morgan. Tell him it's time to wake the old girls up." On the main screen, the Valkyrie fleet was getting closer. They were celebrating their victory, confident that the war was already won. They had no idea what was coming. Sam Holloway was 71 years old. He had served 40 years in the Space Force before retiring to run the Orbital Museum at Titan Station. For the past decade, his job had been simple and peaceful. He maintained the old ships. He gave tours to visitors. He told stories to children about the heroes who had once walked these ancient decks. He had never expected to receive a call like this one. "You want me to do what?" he asked, certain he had heard wrong. Admiral Morgan's voice was calm but urgent. "I need you to reactivate every ship in the Heritage Fleet. All of them, as fast as possible." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Through the window of his office, he could see the Constitution floating in her berth. She was 312 years old. Her hull was covered with patches from a dozen different repairs. Her paint was faded. Her name was barely visible on her side. She was beautiful. "Admiral," he said slowly, "these ships haven't been operational in over a century. Most of them haven't fired a weapon in 200 years. I know. Their systems are outdated. Their crews are museum workers and retired veterans. Half of them can barely walk upstairs, let alone fight a war. I know that too. The Valkyrie have plasma weapons and quantum shields. We have fusion reactors and metal slugs. On paper, this is impossible." "Sam," Morgan's voice was hard now, "our modern fleet is gone. We have 3 damaged ships left. The Valkyrie are coming to destroy Earth, and we have nothing left to stop them. Nothing, except 200 old ships that everyone forgot how to use. So I am asking you, as one old soldier to another, can you make those ships fight?" Sam looked out at the Constitution again. He remembered serving on her as a young man. He remembered the hum of her engines, the shake of her deck when her main guns fired. He remembered thinking that there was no ship in the galaxy that could stand against her. "Yes," he said, "we can make them fight." He ended the call and walked out of his office. His staff was gathered in the main control room, watching news reports of the battle. Many of them were crying. When they saw him coming, they fell silent. "Listen to me," Sam said. "The modern fleet is gone. The Valkyrie will be here in less than 2 days. Earth is sending out evacuation ships. But there's no way to get everyone out in time. Billions of people are going to die unless someone does something." He pointed out the window at the rows of ancient warships floating in their berths. "Those ships out there were built by our ancestors. They were built in a time when humanity was young and scared and fighting for survival against a hostile universe. They were built to last forever. They were built to win." His assistant, a young woman named Megan Price, spoke up. Her voice was shaking. "Sir, those ships are museum pieces. They're relics. How can they fight against the most advanced fleet in the galaxy?" "And the same way they always fought," Sam replied, "with stubbornness, with courage, with crews who refused to give up." He looked at each of them in turn. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. You came here to preserve history, not to make it. But right now, history needs us. Those ships need crews. Are you willing to serve?" One by one, they nodded. Some were scared. Some were determined. All of them were ready. "Then open the dry docks," Sam ordered. "All of them. Wake up every ship we have." Across the solar system, similar scenes were happening at every Heritage Fleet facility. At the Luna Heritage Center, retired Captain Frank Delgado received the activation code on his personal communicator. He was 68 years old, with white hair and hands that shook slightly from age. He had served on the Defiance as a young ensign 50 years ago. He had always thought he would die peacefully in his bed, remembering the old days. Now he was going back to war. He walked into the museum and stood before the Defiance. She was smaller than the big battleships, a destroyer built for speed and aggression. Her armor was scarred from battles fought before most people alive were born. Her guns were cold and silent. "Hello, old friend," Frank said quietly. "Time to wake up." At the series memorial yards, Chief Engineer Laura Webb faced an impossible task. She had 12 decommissioned destroyers under her care, and she needed to get them operational in less than 48 hours. Her staff was made up of mechanics and historians, not combat engineers. They had never prepared a ship for actual battle, but they knew these ships. They had spent years maintaining them, studying them, understanding every system and every quirk. They knew which reactors ran hot, and which ones needed extra time to warm up. They knew which guns had been repaired, and which ones were still original equipment. They knew these ships better than anyone alive. "The fusion cores are cold," her assistant reported. "It will take at least 6 hours to bring them up to operating temperature." "Then we start now," Laura said. "Every minute counts." The Velkari watched all of this with sensors that could detect a warm body from 1,000,000 kilometers away. They saw the thermal signatures of ancient reactors flickering to life across the solar system. They saw the electromagnetic pulses of old weapons systems running diagnostic checks. They saw humans swarming over ships that belonged in a history book. Admiral Zethrol called his officers together to share the news. He was laughing so hard that he could barely speak. "They are activating their museum pieces," he managed to say between fits of amusement. "They are going to fight us with antiques." Tactician Velos was not laughing. Something about this situation bothered him, though he could not say what. "Admiral, should we not attack before they are ready? Strike now, before they can organize?" "Why?" Zethrol asked. "What difference does it make? They could activate 1,000 of those old ships, and it would change nothing. Our plasma lances will cut through their armor like water through sand. Our shields will stop their primitive weapons. Let them prepare. Let them hope. It will make their defeat all the more complete." He turned back to the main screen, where the images of human museum ships were being displayed. "Look at them," he said. "They are already beaten. They just don't know it yet." In orbit around Titan, Sam Holloway stood on the bridge of the Constitution and watched her systems come online one by one. The old screens flickered to life. The old engines began to hum. The old guns rotated in their turrets, testing their range of motion. 312 years old, and still ready to fight. "Message from Admiral Morgan," Megan reported. "She wants a status update." Sam smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen too much and was ready to see more. "Tell her the Constitution is awake," he said, "and she's angry." The Heritage Fleet assembled in the shadow of Jupiter. The great gas giant blocked them from Velkari sensors, its massive magnetic field scrambling any attempt to scan the area. It was the perfect hiding place for an ambush. 217 ships gathered there over the course of 36 hours. They came from every corner of the solar system. Battleships that had not moved under their own power in a century. Destroyers that still bore the scars of wars fought before anyone alive was born. Cruisers and frigates and support vessels, all of them old. All of them supposedly obsolete. All of them ready to fight. Admiral Katie Morgan transferred her flag to the Indomitable. She was a dreadnought, 300 years old, built in an era when humanity believed that bigger was always better. She was nearly 2 kilometers long. Her armor was thick enough to stop a meteor impact. Her main guns could fire a slug the size of a small car at speeds fast enough to circle the Earth in seconds. She was not elegant. She was not efficient. She was not designed to be pretty or economical or easy to maintain. She was designed to destroy anything that stood in her way and survive anything that tried to stop her. Morgan loved her immediately. The crew of the Indomitable was unlike any crew in military history. There were retired veterans who had not worn a uniform in decades. There were museum workers who had spent years caring for the ship but never imagined actually serving on her. There were academy cadets who had been evacuated from Earth and volunteered to fight instead of run. There were civilian volunteers who had simply refused to let their homeworld die without a fight. Commander Pete Harrison, Morgan's new tactical officer, studied the Valkyrie fleet positions on the old display screen. The image was not as sharp as modern displays, but it showed what they needed to see. "Admiral," he said carefully, "their weapons outrange ours by a factor of 3. Their shields can absorb our railgun rounds. Their ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything we have. On paper, this is a battle we cannot win." "I know," Morgan said. "We have no shields. Our armor is thick, but their plasma lances are designed to cut through armor. Most of our crews have never served in combat. Many of them have never even been on an active warship before." "I know that too." "Then how do we win?" Morgan was quiet for a moment. She looked around the bridge at her impossible crew. Old men and young women. Museum workers and cadets. People who had no business being here, and yet had chosen to come anyway. "We win by being something they have never seen before," she said. "They have conquered 17 star systems. Every species they have faced has used the same tactics. Modern shields, modern weapons, ships designed to fight at long range, where technology matters more than courage. They have never faced anything like us." She walked to the main communications console and opened a channel to the entire fleet. Her voice would reach every ship, every deck, every crew member who had answered the call. "This is Admiral Morgan," she began. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about our odds. You're thinking about their technology. You're thinking about all the reasons why this should be impossible. I understand. I've been thinking about those things too." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The enemy thinks we are relics. They think that because our ships are old, we are weak. They think that because we preserve our past, we have no future. They are wrong." On the Constitution, Sam Holloway stood on the bridge and listened. Around him, his crew of museum workers and volunteers held their breath. These ships were built by people who understood something that the Valkyrie have forgotten. They understood that war is not about technology. War is about will. War is about the determination to keep fighting when every logical part of your brain is screaming at you to surrender. Our ancestors did not build these ships to win battles. They built them to survive them. They built them tough. They built them simple. They built them mean. On the Defiance, Captain Frank Delgado gripped the railing of his bridge. His hands were not shaking anymore. "The Valkyrie have shields," Morgan continued. "We have 3 meters of hardened steel. Their shields can be overloaded. Our armor cannot. They have plasma weapons. We have kinetic slug throwers that fire solid metal at 15 kilometers per second. Their weapons are elegant, ours are brutal. And in a fight, brutal wins." Laura Webb listened from the engine room of one of her reactivated destroyers. Her hands were covered in grease and her face was streaked with exhaustion. She had not slept in 2 days. She smiled. "In a few hours, we are going to attack the most advanced fleet in the galaxy with ships that belong in museums. Every tactical calculation says we should lose. Every computer simulation says we should be destroyed. But those calculations don't account for something that cannot be calculated." Morgan's voice hardened. "They do not account for 300 years of human stubbornness. They do not account for the courage of people who would rather die fighting than live as slaves. They do not account for the fury of a species that was told to surrender and refused. Across the fleet, crews straightened their backs, hands gripped weapons, hearts beat faster. We are not museum pieces. We are not relics. We are humanity's memory made flesh. We are the ghosts of every battle ever fought, and every victory ever won. And today, we remind the galaxy why they should never have forgotten about us. She took a deep breath. All ships. This is Admiral Morgan. We move out in 1 hour. Our ancestors built these ships to last forever. Today, we prove them right. Morgan out, the channel closed. Silence filled the Indomitable's bridge. Then someone started clapping. It spread across the bridge, then across the ship, then across the fleet. 217 ships full of people who should have been terrified, who should have been running away, who should have been doing anything except flying ancient warships into battle against an overwhelming enemy. Instead, they were cheering. Pete Harrison looked at his admiral with something like awe on his face. That was quite a speech, he said. Morgan allowed herself a small smile. I meant every word. She turned to the navigation officer, a young cadet who had been at the academy less than 6 months. Set course for the enemy fleet, she ordered. All ahead full. The Heritage fleet moved out from Jupiter's shadow. 217 ships, older than most civilizations in the galaxy, sailed toward the greatest battle in human history. They were ready. Admiral Zethral was eating his evening meal when the sensors detected the approaching fleet. He did not bother to hurry. He finished his food, cleaned his claws, and walked slowly to the bridge of the Eternal Judgment. His officers were waiting for him with expressions that mixed confusion and amusement. They are actually coming, Tactician Velos reported. 217 vessels, approaching from the direction of the gas giant. Zethral studied the sensor display. The human ships were moving in a loose formation, spreading out as they approached. Their thermal signatures were strange, different from modern warships. Their engine emissions were crude and powerful, like controlled explosions, rather than the smooth energy output of quantum drives. They move like drunk animals, he observed. No formation discipline. No tactical coordination. They are scattering like prey. Should we go to battle stations, Admiral? Zethral made a dismissive gesture with his upper left hand. Why? These are museum pieces crewed by old men and children. Our plasma lances will destroy them before they even get close enough to use those primitive weapons of theirs. This will not be a battle. It will be an execution. He settled into his command chair and watched the human fleet approach. In the back of his mind, there was a small voice telling him that something was wrong. The humans were not acting like a desperate, defeated enemy. They were acting like something else entirely. He ignored the voice. He had never lost a battle. He would not lose this one. The first sign of trouble came when the Constitution disappeared. One moment, the old battleship was visible on sensors, lumbering toward the Velkari fleet with the rest of the human formation. The next moment, she was gone. No explosion, no debris, just gone. What happened? Velos demanded. Where did that ship go? Before anyone could answer, the Constitution emerged from the shadow of a small moon at point-blank range. She was less than 50 kilometers from the Eternal Judgment, so close that Zethral could see her scarred hull through the bridge windows. Her guns were already firing. The Velkari had shields designed to stop plasma lances and particle beams. These were elegant, high-energy weapons that could be absorbed and dispersed by carefully tuned electromagnetic fields. Their shields were the most advanced defensive technology in the known galaxy. They had never encountered a ship that fired 3-ton tungsten slugs at 15 kilometers per second. The first salvo hit the Eternal Judgment like the fist of an angry god. The shields flared brilliantly, trying to stop the incoming rounds. For a fraction of a second, they held. Then they failed completely, overwhelmed by the sheer kinetic energy of the attack. The slugs did not stop at the shields. They did not stop at the hull. They passed through the entire ship and exited the other side, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. Compartments decompressed. Systems failed. Crew members died before they even understood what was happening. Zethral was thrown from his chair as the ship shook violently. Alarms were screaming. Emergency lights were flashing. Through the smoke and chaos, he could hear his officers shouting damage reports. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 12. Shield generators are offline. We've lost main power to the forward sections. What was that? Zethral gasped, pulling himself upright. What hit us? The answer came from a human broadcast, transmitted on an open channel that every Valkyrie ship could hear. The voice was old and rough, but filled with something that sounded almost like joy. That was the USS Constitution, you arrogant bastards. And she's got plenty more where that came from. Across the battlefield, the Heritage Fleet had stopped pretending to be helpless. The old ships had been built in an era before shields, before plasma weapons, before quantum drives. They had been designed for a different kind of war. A brutal and simple kind of war, where the only things that mattered were armor, firepower, and the willingness to get close enough to use them. The Valkyrie had never faced anything like this. The Defiance attacked from behind an asteroid, her engines burning hot, as Captain Frank Delgado drove her straight at a Valkyrie cruiser. The enemy ship fired its plasma lances, and the beams struck the Defiance's hull with tremendous force. Metal glowed and melted, armor plating vaporized, but the Defiance kept coming. Her armor was 3 meters thick. Her hull was built in layers, each one designed to absorb damage that would destroy a modern ship. The plasma lances burned through the first layer. They burned through the second. They reached the third, and slowed, their energy spent, and then the Defiance was close enough to fire. Her railguns roared, sending a storm of metal into the Valkyrie cruiser at close range. The enemy shields flickered and died. The hull crumpled like paper. The cruiser exploded in a ball of fire and debris. She's still good, the damage control officer reported as the Defiance pulled away. Hull breaches on the outer sections, but the core is holding. We can fight. Then we keep fighting, Delgado replied. His hands were steady on the controls. His eyes were fixed on the next target. Find me another one. Similar scenes were happening all across the battlefield. The old human ships were using tactics that had been obsolete for centuries. They were hiding behind moons and asteroids. They were attacking from unexpected angles. They were getting close. Closer than any modern ship would dare to go, and using their brutal, kinetic weapons at ranges where shields simply could not absorb enough energy to matter. Commander Chris Navarro, on the Constitution, ordered his crew to do something that made his young officers gasp in horror. He aimed his ship directly at a Valkyrie cruiser and accelerated to full speed. "Sir, you're going to hit them," the helmsman shouted. "That's the idea," Navarro replied calmly. The Constitution's bow was reinforced with a solid mass of hardened steel. It had been designed in an era when ramming was still considered a valid tactical option. 300 years ago, her builders had looked at their beautiful ship and thought, what if we need to crash into something? Now, that ancient design philosophy was about to be tested. The Constitution struck the Valkyrie cruiser at full speed. Her reinforced bow sliced through the enemy ship like a knife through bread. Metal screamed as the two vessels collided. The Valkyrie cruiser broke in half, its quantum reactors exploding in a cascade of light and energy. "Damage report," Navarro called out. "Hull breaches on decks, 7 through 12. Main armor is holding. Engines are still operational. She's hurt, sir, but she can still fight." Navarro smiled. 312 years old, and the Constitution was still the toughest ship in any fleet. "Good. Find me another target." Admiral Zethral watched his fleet being destroyed and could not understand what he was seeing. His ships were more advanced. His weapons were more powerful. His crews were better trained. Everything about this battle should have been in his favor. But the humans were not fighting the way they were supposed to fight. They were not maintaining formation. They were not engaging at range. They were swarming his fleet like angry insects, getting close and hitting hard before his ships could respond. And their weapons, those primitive kinetic weapons that should have been useless against Valkyrie shields, were tearing his fleet apart. "Order all ships to concentrate fire on the largest human vessels," he commanded desperately. "Destroy them before they can get close." But it was too late. The Heritage Fleet was already among them, and the slaughter had begun. Admiral Morgan watched the battle from the Indomitable's bridge and allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The plan was working. The enemy was confused and scattered. The old ships were doing exactly what they had been built to do. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Press the attack. Leave none of them intact." The Heritage Fleet obeyed. 217 museum ships, crewed by veterans and volunteers and people who refused to give up, tore the greatest armada in the galaxy to pieces. The Battle of the Graveyard had begun, and the ghosts were winning. The battle ended at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time. It had lasted 47 minutes. Of the 300 Velkari ships that had invaded the Sol system, only 17 survived to limp away toward Dominion space. Their shields were burned out, their weapons were empty. Their crews were traumatized by what they had witnessed. They had come to conquer a young and weak species. Instead, they had been broken by ghosts. Admiral Zethril was not among the survivors. The Eternal Judgment had been destroyed in the final minutes of the battle, rammed by a 200-year-old frigate whose captain had chosen to sacrifice his ship rather than let the enemy commander escape. There were no prisoners. There was no mercy. The Heritage Fleet had paid a heavy price for its victory. 63 ships had been destroyed. Thousands of humans had died. Veterans who had come out of retirement. Museum workers who had become warriors overnight. Cadets who would never graduate. Volunteers who had simply refused to let their home fall without a fight. But they had won. Admiral Katie Morgan stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching the debris field that had once been the Velkari invasion fleet. Pieces of alien ships floated among the wreckage of human vessels. In death, conquerors and defenders drifted together through the cold silence of space. Sam Holloway stood beside her. He was leaning heavily on a cane, exhausted beyond words. He had served on the Constitution's bridge during the battle, refusing to stay behind while younger people fought. His hands were still shaking slightly, but his eyes were clear. "They'll be back," Morgan said quietly. "The Dominion won't accept this defeat. They'll send more ships, more weapons. They'll come again." "Let them come," Sam replied. "We'll be ready. We've always been ready." "That's what they never understood about us." Morgan nodded slowly. She looked out at the debris field and thought about the price that had been paid. So many people had died today. So many ships had been lost. The human race had survived, but survival had never been cheap. "How many of our ships can be repaired?" she asked. "About half of them. The others are too damaged to save. But the ships that made it through, they're tough. Always have been. We can have them operational again within a month." "Good. We're going to need them." In the weeks that followed, the survivors returned home as heroes. The Heritage Fleet was formally recommissioned as the Earth Defense Force Reserve. Every ship that had fought in the battle was repaired, upgraded where possible, and returned to active standby status. They would never be mere museum pieces again, but they also remained museums. Admiral Morgan insisted on it. The ships had earned the right to tell their own stories. School children toured the Constitution and ran their fingers along the patched hull breaches, now marked with small plaques explaining what had happened at each point of damage. Veterans told stories of the battle to wide-eyed visitors. The ships were more popular than ever. Not just as relics of the past, but as symbols of what humanity could achieve when pushed to the edge. Captain Frank Delgado retired for the second time, but he remained the official caretaker of the Defiance. He spent his days giving tours and telling stories, and his nights watching the stars through the observation windows of the ship he had fought on twice. Laura Webb was promoted to chief engineer of the entire Heritage Fleet. She spent the next year developing new procedures for keeping old ships in fighting shape while still allowing public access. It was a difficult balance, but she managed it. Her staff, once museum workers and historians, had become some of the most skilled engineers in the fleet. Commander Chris Navarro stayed on the Constitution. When asked if he wanted a newer, more advanced ship, he laughed. "Why would I want a ship that hasn't proven herself in battle?" he said. "The Constitution has 300 years of victories behind her. I'll take experience over technology any day." Sam Holloway returned to his job at the Heritage Fleet Museum, but his role had changed. He was no longer just preserving history. He was preparing for the future. Every ship in his care was maintained to combat readiness. Every system was tested regularly. Every crew position had a trained volunteer ready to step in at a moment's notice. The galaxy took notice of what had happened in the Sol system. Other species, long conquered by the Valkyrie Dominion, heard stories of the humans who had defeated the invaders with antique ships and impossible courage. Whispers of resistance spread through Dominion space. The old order began to shake. 1 year after the battle, Admiral Morgan gave a speech at the Titan Station Memorial. A wall of black marble had been erected there, carved with the names of every person who had died defending humanity. It was a long wall. It held many names. Thousands of people gathered to listen. Veterans in old uniforms. Families of the fallen. Children who had been saved by the sacrifice of strangers. Representatives from a dozen worlds that had heard of humanity's victory and wanted to see the species that had humbled the Dominion. Morgan stood before them all and spoke. 1 year ago, the Valkyrie Dominion came to our home with 300 warships. They came with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. They came with centuries of conquest behind them, and absolute confidence in their victory. They looked at our museum ships and laughed. They called us sentimental fools for preserving our old weapons instead of building new ones. She paused, letting the silence stretch. They were wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd. We kept those ships because we remember. We remember what it cost to build them. We remember what it cost to crew them. We remember what it cost to win with them. Every scar on every hull tells a story. Every name on this wall represents a life given in defense of something greater than any single person. She gestured at the memorial behind her. The Valkyrie thought our museums were proof of weakness. They thought that preserving the past meant we had no future. But they forgot something important. They forgot that memory is power. The lessons our ancestors learned. The sacrifices they made. The wisdom they earned through blood and fire. All of that lives on in the ships we preserved. When we needed them, they were ready, because we remembered how to make them ready. Her voice hardened. The Dominion will come again. They will send more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. They think that if they hit us hard enough, we will break. They are wrong about that too, because we are not a species that forgets. We are not a species that surrenders. We are not a species that gives up when the odds are against us. She looked out at the crowd, at the veterans and the families and the children and the alien observers. The galaxy now knows what we have always known. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not surrender. And humanity will never, ever stop fighting for its home. She raised her hand in salute. Across the crowd, thousands of hands rose in answer. In orbit above, the Constitution caught the light of the sun. She was 313 years old now, scarred and patched and more beautiful than any new ship could ever be. Her hull told the story of 100 battles. Her name would be remembered for 1,000 years. She was a relic. She was a memorial. She was a weapon, and she was ready. Far away, in Dominion space, the survivors of the invasion fleet told their story to anyone who would listen. They spoke of ancient ships that would not die. They spoke of humans who fought with a fury that bordered on madness. They spoke of kinetic weapons that punched through shields like they were made of nothing. And in the dark corners of the Dominion, conquered species began to whisper a new word: hope. The war was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But humanity had proven something that day in the cold space around Jupiter. They had proven that age was not weakness. They had proven that memory was not sentimentality. They had proven that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The museum ships had become legends, and legends never truly die.